What up? T-Bob here.
And Jake as well.
And look at you. You done stumbled upon little OTB Saints, where we bring you all the latest black and gold coverage.
Who are the Saints going to draft? Who's going to be their quarterback? What does the salary cap look like? All that information and more.
Hope you enjoy it. Like, subscribe.
Right now, I want to go to the phone lines, bring in Ross Jackson. He hosts Locked on Saints. He also does write-ups for us at LouisianaSports.net. Ross, how are you today, man?
What's up, buddy? Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, Ross. I wanted to kind of do a little combine recap, but last week, Matt Moscona tells me you drove to the combine in Indianapolis. Is that correct?
I did, yes.
Wow.
I love to drive, and I love long-distance drive, and so that was a long-distance drive.
How long did it take?
So it's about an 11-hour drive.
Okay, I was actually thinking it was going to be a lot more than that.
No, it's shockingly not bad. It's there's better places you could drive to in 11 hours than Indianapolis. Don't get me wrong, but Indianapolis is awesome. And so we cut it in half. We drove from New Orleans to Nashville, and then finished the drive the next day up in Indianapolis. But it was great.
How was the food scene in Indianapolis? I hear it's actually pretty underrated.
It's pretty underrated. It's good. It's a lot of steak. I'm not a red meat guy, so I don't get to enjoy it very much. But they have some pretty good seafood and stuff like that over there too. I don't typically do seafood outside of New Orleans, but that's one of the cities where I'll risk it.
Now, Ross, was this your first combine to physically go to?
No, this was my I want to say fourth. It might actually be fifth, but it was one of the two. It was like around a handful.
So, okay, kind of give me a little bit of a background of, like, the behind-the-scenes of the combine. Like, what's the coolest part of being there? Because, like, us at home, we'll turn on the TV and we'll see guys, run a 40-yard dash. There's a little golf clap at the background. But, like, what do you get to see while you're there?
I love the golf clap. It's funny. Like, I actually typically leave Indianapolis before the combine drills even get started. For us, it's a lot of going, kind of trying to pick up a little bit of the chit chat and everything like that, like some of the rumors that are going on, doing some of the night scene to kind of meet up and have conversations and things like that. I think you try to like steal some of those conversations as you can. But also like the way that the Saints do things is really unique. Like they don't do the podium at the combine like a lot of other teams do. There's a few teams that do it this way, but they kind of do their own thing off to the side with local media only, which is really nice. And so being able to be there for that, being able to be there for, some of the conversations that are going and being able to pick the brains of people in the know around like, hey, what's kind of going on free agent wise across the NFL, who's becoming available, who's not, all those other things. So you're trying to pick up kind of all that information from a bunch of different angles, not just the New Orleans Saints angle, because, markets could become oversaturated, which impact the way that the Saints play their, version of the market. So you kind of have to know what's going on holistically around the league in order to really understand how maybe some of the decisions that New Orleans wants to make, plans to make, or would like to make are really impacted by the overall landscape of things.
As far as like the combine itself, like standouts, positive or negative, is there a guy that like surprised you in a positive way or like you thought was going to perform really well who maybe didn't? Like what would you kind of make of it overall?
Yeah, I mean, look, I will say this was a unique combine where we saw some, I don't even remember what the number was. We saw a lot of people not participating. So that was one that kind of changed a bit of what the projection of the weekend was going to be. But Mika Manwari, the safety out of South Carolina, was absolutely incredible at the combine and really checked a lot of boxes. And my understanding was that like all of his interviews that he did were really solid. He obviously did well at the podiums and things like that. But like his testing as a whole was outstanding for the day, just in terms of the way that he measured, going out there and running a 4.4, going out there and jumping 43 inches with an 11-foot broad jump, like just amazing performance by him. So he was probably a guy that really stood out. And I think another one that stood out that we kind of expected to be the case was Texas A&M defensive end Shamar Stewart. Shamar Stewart was outstanding in terms of his testing. He just lacks a lot of collegiate production. Manwari does not lack that collegiate production. So for me, he was the standout.
Yeah, he's a guy that, anytime I've heard about positive standouts, Manwari is kind of the first name out of their mouths. And also, he's 6'3", 220 at the safety position.
Right.
That's a guy that's going to come off the board a lot earlier. As far as the Saints in round one, we have seen a variety of people being mocked to him. I mean, we've seen Tyler Warren, Ashton Genty. We've seen defensive linemen. In your opinion, where should the Saints go in round one?
My number one prospect for them is Ketterow McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona. I think he's the one that has the biggest, most immediate impact. The Saints are clear that they're intending to compete here in 2025. And if you're going to do that, then go and get somebody in that first round that's immediately going to have an impact for you, right? You're probably not in the position in that case to draft somebody that you feel like you can develop some kind of project or something like that. You got to go and get a surefire guy. Ketterow McMillan is a surefire guy. He would be an excellent complement to guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. So he's up there. Kind of my 1B, like a really close number 2 would be Michigan defensive tackle Mason Graham, should he fall. I don't know if he makes it to them. But, I mean, look, the Saints have work to do on both sides of their trenches. I think the defensive tackle class is deeper than the wide receiver class is when it comes to top talent. But if a guy like Mason Graham falls, that's a pretty easy one to get excited about. And then the last one that I'll mention, I think, is the one that was most mentioned around the New Orleans Saints in Indianapolis, was Penn State tight end Tyler Warren. I'm typically not a tight end in the first round guy or a tight end in the top 15 guy, probably more appropriately. Because it's typically a position that takes a long time, a couple of years to translate to the NFL. But a guy like Tyler Warren, who's already a solid blocker, which is a lot of the reasons why it's typically tougher to transition. In college, you're like a pass catcher, right? You're just another wide receiver in a way, a lot of times. And then after that, when you get to the NFL, all of a sudden you have to learn protections and all this stuff. Well, Tyler Warren plays in the Big Ten. There's a lot of protection that goes on in the Big Ten, a lot of blocking that goes on in the Big Ten, the punt conference. And so I think a guy like Tyler Warren maybe can transition a little bit faster than most tight ends can. And so he could be a guy that has an immediate impact for New Orleans as well.
Ross, that kind of leads me into the next point. If it's not Tyler Warren in round one, where do you think the tight end position is, maybe like on the Saints priority list? And like, are there any guys you like maybe second, third round?
Yeah, I think it's on their priority list to address a couple of times. And that could be re-signing Juwan Johnson and a new acquisition. It could be a pair of new acquisitions. Like there's multiple ways to kind of address the spot for sure. But I think that's a spot that they're looking to address. Juwan's going into free agency. Foster Morrow as well as Taysom Hill are both coming off of injury. You've got a young guy in Dallin Holker who's really promising, but you haven't gotten to see a lot of him yet. And then you've got a couple of guys that are coming through, Trayton Welsh as well as Michael Jacobson that are coming off of, future deals and, kind of practice squad years and stuff like that. And so I would absolutely see them addressing that position. I think it's on their priority list. I don't know where it is on their priority list because it's going to depend on how deep the priority list is, right? Like they got a lot of work to do this offseason on their roster. But I do know that they want to address it multiple times. And so I think the draft makes a lot of sense. Second and third round guys, that make sense. Harold Fanning Jr. out of Bowling Green, probably the best tight end in the country when it came to production. Outstanding. A little bit undersized, though, so maybe doesn't check the boxes for New Orleans in terms of an all-around guy that has worked for Kellen Moore. So one guy that comes to mind, and I'm probably going to catch a lot of flack for this because he's an LSU Tiger, but Mason Taylor, man, he makes sense. Look, I get it. The New Orleans Saints haven't often invested in LSU players. The last one that they drafted, if I remember correctly, it was Will Clapp years ago. So they kind of overdue. They typically do this on a rotation of like every 9 years on average. They end up selecting some LSU player. They're a little overdue on it. And I think Mason Taylor is a guy that makes sense, has that same kind of all-around perspective, can block, can catch, can run routes. I think he would be another guy that I would absolutely watch.
Ross Jackson joining us right now, host of Locked On Saints and our Saints writer for LouisianaSports.net. Ross, the good news is the Saints need every position, so you can't really go wrong. The bad news is they pretty much need every position, right? As far as a late-round target, I'm not even talking like mainly position, but like if there is a guy that falls late round and the Saints are thinking, hey, maybe best available, if there's a guy out there who's there in the late rounds that you want the Saints to grab, is there a guy out there?
Missouri edge rusher Johnny Walker Jr. Johnny Walker Jr. to me is a dude that is just like one of those guys that to me is going to be the steal of the draft wherever he goes, unless he skyrockets, right? If he skyrockets, then obviously things change, but because then the expectations will be higher. But if he's drafted in day 3, 6'3", 250-ish pounds, stand-up edge rusher, was the Cotton Bowl defensive player, defensive MVP when Missouri played in the Cotton Bowl a couple years ago, 9.5 sacks last season. I think he had 2 sacks against Alabama and everything. He forced 3 fumbles, so he affects the ball when he gets to the players as well. and is just a hyper athletic player. I think in Brandon Staley's defense in particular, where you're looking for that type of mold, the pass rusher, the stand-up speed pass rusher, the Leonard Floyd type, if you're able to get a Johnny Walker Jr. in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round, I don't care. You do it. you roll that dice. You got to trade up into the 5th to do it. If you got to stay put in the 6th to do it, whatever it is, if you're able to get him in that day 3 range, I think he's a guy that's well worth investing in at that point. And I'll also throw in also one of my favorite names in the draft, by the way, Mac McWilliams.
Great name.
Isn't that awesome, dude? Mac McWilliams, the cornerback out of UCF, like great physical build, has a lot of production, makes a lot of plays at the ball, good scheme versatility playing in that Central Florida defense. I think he's another one that I would highlight as well.
Ross, before I get you out of here, look, the Saints, since hiring Kellen Moore, they've hired Brandon Staley as DC. You got Doug Nussmeier as OC. They just announced they're bringing in Scott Linehan. You hire Bo Davis away from LSU. What have you made of the staff that Kellen Moore has put together so far?
Yeah, I like the structure of the staff. I think there's 2 things to highlight. I think there's the hires, which are the individual names of those coaches and what their backgrounds are and all those other things. I like the fact that he's got 2, former head coaches on his coaching staff. I like the fact that he brought Doug Nussmeier back to Louisiana and did it with bringing him in as a guy that kind of balances him out a little bit as he describes it. But the other piece that I really like is the structure of the coaching staff, particularly over on the defensive side. The Saints feel like with their hires that they're going to maybe have like a passing game coordinator, a safeties coach, and a cornerbacks coach, as opposed to a defensive backs coach. And I like that. I like being able to translate the game immediately to one position group. It sounds like or looks like they might have like an inside linebacker versus outside linebacker coach, which kind of shows you a little bit about what their plans are for their pass rush and changing that. So I think the structure of the defensive coaching staff, which is really replicating what Brandon Staley had in 2020 with the Los Angeles Rams, I think shows you exactly what it is that this team is looking to do over on the defensive side. So that's the other thing that I'd highlight that I think is a plus in terms of the way that they've structured this roster. But the former head coaches on the coaching staff roster with a first-time head coach, I think is an excellent move by Kellen Moore.
All right, Ross Jackson, our guest right now. Ross, thanks for hopping on with me today, man.
Wow, just amazing black and gold takes right there, Jake.
I don't think I've ever heard any takes that are better than the 2 guys that just gave you that take.
And you can keep getting them by going ahead and liking, subscribing, ringing the bell to get notifications when we post. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next OTB Saints.